Welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about a book that's been a long time coming. That book is by Bessel van der Kolk, MD, and that is The Body Keeps the Score. I've known about this book for quite some time now, and for whatever reason, just had other books coming up ahead of it that I was reading, and I kept putting it off. The book turned out to be a little different than how I expected. I'm not sure how I expected the book to come across, but I knew how widely popular it was, even among lay people, and for some reason I just had a different idea of what the book would actually be like. It's actually a bit more serious of a text than I imagined, if that makes sense. Regardless, I'm very grateful that I have finally read the book, and it really has enriched my viewpoint even further on, trauma, what that looks like in various different settings and people from different backgrounds and different age groups, what makes traumatic experiences, or what makes people more susceptible to developing PTSD-like symptomologies from traumatic experiences. Because indeed, all people who go through things that we would consider to be traumatic do not inevitably, end up with PTSD. So what is it about certain experiences that lend them to, making people more susceptible to actual post-traumatic stress disorder? And what are some different ways that we can approach this? Towards the end of the book, as he's describing different modalities for treatment, he's really speaking my language, and it makes me so grateful to have this channel where I've been, sharing my thoughts on different books, so that I can especially share my thoughts on topics like these that I hold so, close to me, and that I've in many ways, dedicated my life towards, exploring more and looking into more ways to help people. So as the book goes through, it talks about how different traumatic experiences affect the brain, mind, and body, which is right there on the cover, and healing from trauma. And it talks about what a traumatic experience entails. Now, we can all make assumptions and guess what types of different experiences would be traumatic. This book, I will say, has a lot of dark material. As it's going through and describing what some of these people, both young and old, men and women, have been through, it is horrible, horrendous, things. People have the capacity to do incredible things to each other, incredibly terrible things to each other. And this book doesn't shy away from that. And those of us who work in healthcare, many times we're on the front lines of helping people work through that. And we're exposed to, at least depictions or stories, accounts of what they've been through. Thank God that we weren't going through it as they went through it, but it's still, these things are so horrible that it's still difficult to even hear about them at times. But we have to fortify ourselves and be prepared to hear those things, to, allow ourselves to be a container. And in many cases, we may need to work through that as well. I don't want to get too off topic here. So I just wanted to be upfront that if you're reading this book, be prepared to cover some dark material. Now, what is it about these traumatic experiences that, make people more susceptible to developing the sorts of symptomologies that we associate with PTSD? Now, PTSD, just broadly speaking, as far as the DSM diagnosis is concerned, we can think of 4 areas that we would expect to see. Hyperarousal, okay, avoidance, okay, and remembering, flashbacks, think flashbacks, dreams, things like that, and then general distress, okay? Those 4 areas we would expect to see after the fact, after some traumatic experience and lingering on and affecting someone's life in a negative way. Now, everyone who goes through something that is traumatic doesn't have this issue. But as this book describes, both from anecdotal accounts and from neuroimaging, from different angles, something about the traumatic experiences that lend themselves to precipitating PTSD that are different. And oftentimes that has to do with an experience that someone feels helpless to escape. They feel like they're unable to control the situation, they're unable to do something about it, and parts of the brain tend to shut down in response. This, as I put all the pieces together in a way, leads to memories that are fragmented, in many ways. And it leads to memories, past experiences that people cannot fit into an overarching narrative structure of who they are in their life and the world that they inhabit. They can't fit it into a cohesive narrative, these memories that are so fragmented. I was thinking of an analogy that I think works here. If you think of a computer that has all this data stored, its memories, sometimes, as you've either experienced or heard of, storage files can become corrupted. And at that point, they're inaccessible by the computer. The computer can no longer access them directly and manipulate them in a way that a computer would typically do with data. In a similar way, this is an analogy, these experiences are formed from fragmented memories that the brain has trouble directly accessing, making sense of, and being able to manipulate into the type of memory that the brain really wants to create, which is memory of something that's useful for the person going forward, that helps to update their narrative structure, that helps to update their model of the world so that they can move forward in life having learned from past experiences. The body, the mind, the brain wants to remember what has either hurt the person in the past or remember close calls that could have led to hurt or some detrimental outcome so as to, avoid that going forward, so as to keep the person safe. The body is an incredibly adaptive organism, but sometimes people find themselves in terrible situations for a multitude of reasons that they can't escape, that are so awful that different parts of the brain shut down during the experience, and it results in these fragmented memories that are difficult to access, they're difficult to manipulate, and they're difficult to make use of. Going forward, people will sometimes build up their lives around avoiding anything that reminds them on a conscious or even subconscious level of the trauma that they've been through. And as they avoid this, the problem tends to grow and grow and grow until it suffocates other areas of their lives. It's very difficult for people who are suffering from this to carry on in a meaningful way. It's horrible. And this book does a great job of explaining this concept, this model of what these traumatic, experiences are like to the person's brain and how they perceive their memories of these past events. It talks about how these memories are oftentimes suppressed. It talks about how these memories sometimes seem to be stored within the body itself, that physical sensations are oftentimes what's left over and tied to the remnants of these memories of the experiences. Then the book gets into different modalities for approaching treatment. And oftentimes these modalities incorporate, as the title of the book may suggest, physical therapies that allow the person, and sometimes in an abstract way, to get back in touch with those memories, to bring them back to the surface so that they can be integrated into a greater whole. I'm in many ways a Jungian in terms of, my reading and my way of conceptualizing things. But it is true that across different schools of thought within psychology, we are often at the end of the day trying to integrate all these things into a whole self. And I do believe that the mind is trying to do that in a general sense. So the book goes through different types of therapies, including EMDR. It talks about IFS, internal family systems therapy, PBSP, psychomotor therapy. It talks about even things like yoga and things like theater, ways of abstracting that which is difficult for the person to represent, to confront directly, emotions, interpersonal relationships, abstracting it in an environment that's safer for them to explore that within so that they can incorporate it, understand it, make use of it moving forward, and move on with their life, which is oftentimes what these people really want to do. They want to be able to move on with their life, but it's so difficult for them to do that. Now, some notes I've taken, that this common theme of confronting a traumatic past, reorganizing it, its fragmented files, and making sense of it. It leaves a lot of these memories unnamed. And I do believe in the quote that oftentimes the truth will set you free. And that can be taken in different ways. It's one of those quotes that has meanings that go down to the depths in terms of its layers. But the truth can set you free. And oftentimes in therapy, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get at the actual truth of the matter. We're trying to say it out loud so that it can be understood. It can finally be seen for what it is and incorporated into the whole. He talks about theater, as I said, as a means for young and old alike to have a space that they can feel comfortable within, abstracting their past memories, abstracting their past traumas, putting it into theater while interacting with others in an environment that's safe for them. And he talks about how difficult it is for these people to feel comfortable in their own bodies oftentimes. And that's the importance of things like theater and singing and dancing and interacting with others and syncing yourself up with other people in a meaningful social way, as well as things like yoga, focusing on the body, feeling the body, breathing, trying to exert some sort of conscious control over the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems through these practices. Talks about all of it. And, at the end of the day, psychiatry has a problem to contend with. And that is the realization that to truly help people, it often takes a lot more time than a 15-minute appointment. And that may hurt the bottom line in terms of money, but psychiatry and healthcare in general is about so much more than money. People get into this field because they want to help people. And you can help people a lot of the time with medication, depending on what they're dealing with, depending on what they're going through, depending on the diagnosis in many cases. Yes, you can help them. You can help them to various degrees. Some you can help a lot, some you can help a little. Some you can use medication at least to build a solid foundation that you can work on from there forward. But what I do not like is simply using medication to numb the symptoms that are at the very end of the stream, far downstream from the actual problems, and leaving people in a destitute part of their life where they haven't actually confronted the source of their issues. They haven't actually gone back, uncovered those repressed memories, and integrated it in a way that allows them to truly move forward with their life. That takes time. That takes these other sorts of therapies that are outlined in this book and described more thoroughly in this book. It's a difficult balance to strike, because if you want to spend more time with particular patients, then you have less time to see other patients. If you want to spend less time with all of your patients overall, then you have less time available to you with each individual patient to really do deep and meaningful work. So we're left at the end of the day with the goal of figuring out the most efficient way to make use of the time that we have. But one thing's for sure, that I do believe psychiatry for a while now has been headed in a particular direction that has an emphasis on psychopharmacology, on medication that affects the mind, and has had an emphasis on seeing more patients more quickly. And I do believe that many patients with many different, disorders or illnesses, whatever you want to call it, whatever name you want to put to it, whatever DSM diagnosis you want to put to it, are struggling from past experiences that they have learned to cope with in various ways that may have been useful for them at a time, but as Carl Jung says, and as many of the others have said, they're suffering from their solutions that worked for them then and are no longer working for them now. A lot of these people are carrying out behavioral patterns and patterns of interacting with others that helped them survive when they were 5, 6, 7 years old. And now these people are in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. They're living in a different environment now, but they didn't learn how to operate within that environment. They're still working on old patterns. They're still running on old software, if you will. And and it needs to be updated. A pill to simply take down off the edge at the end of the day for them is not going to help them learn what they need to learn about themselves and others to operate in a more meaningful and fulfilling way in their life. This book really outlines all of that. And even if you are familiar with these different modalities of therapy, if you're familiar with PTSD, as many of you probably are, it still gives you a rich perspective on the types of trauma that people deal with. And I believe a rich perspective in terms of conceptualizing how that trauma leads to what we inevitably end up calling PTSD. So I would definitely recommend this book to anyone who's in the mental health care field. And I want to speak more about the approach to treatment with children that have suffered through traumatic experiences. But I feel that this video is already probably going on long enough. So I'm gonna talk more about that right here, but in a part 2 to this video so that I can speak more specifically about different approaches to treating children, okay? So that's part 1 of this video. The body keeps the score. Thank you for watching. Please comment down below if you have any thoughts on this, or if you want to share your perspective on things. I really enjoy hearing from you, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.